The billionaire's life was one many could only dream of. He lived in a grand mansion at the edge of the city, a massive estate that stretched for miles. The house was filled with priceless art, shiny marble floors, and luxurious furniture. Outside, his garage held cars that cost more than most people's entire homes. His life was filled with parties, dinners, and business meetings. People always surrounded him, eager to be close to the man with so much power and money. But despite all the wealth and luxury, something was missing. Every day, he woke up in his grand bedroom with a perfect view of the city. He had everything he could ever want: money, fame, and all the material things that most people dreamed of. Yet, when he looked out the window, something deep inside him felt empty. He wasn't happy. He often found himself alone in the mansion, even though it was filled with people. He spent his days in meetings, making deals, and hosting extravagant events. But when the events ended, and the guests left, the mansion seemed colder. It was as if his wealth had trapped him in a life that was full of things but lacking in real connection. He wondered, often, if this was what life was really about. Was it all just about accumulating things? All those shiny cars, the giant house, the fame, none of it seemed to matter when he was alone. He could hear the laughter from the party outside his study window, but he didn't feel like joining them. It felt like a world where no one truly saw him, just the image he had built for himself. His life had become a performance, and he was the star. But in the silence of his home, he felt like the loneliest man alive. That night, there was another party. It was the usual kind: elegant dresses, fancy suits, clinking glasses, and soft music. The billionaire was there, walking through the crowd, nodding at people, shaking hands, and pretending to enjoy the evening. Everyone admired him, but no one truly knew him. No one cared about who he was beyond his wealth. The same people who laughed with him tonight would turn their backs as soon as he left the room. It was always the same. But then, he saw her. Maria wasn't like the others. She wasn't dressed in an expensive gown or wearing expensive jewelry. Instead, she was wearing a simple black dress, modest and elegant. She wasn't mingling with the guests or showing off. She was standing by the buffet, quietly making sure everything was in place, doing her job as a maid. Her presence, though, caught his attention immediately. She had this quiet grace about her, something different from everyone else. It wasn't just her looks. There was something about her demeanor, something genuine and real that stood out. The billionaire found himself drawn to her. As he walked through the room, he kept glancing back at her. There was a connection, an unspoken pull, something that neither of them could explain. She seemed unaware of the attention she was getting. She was just doing her job, focused on what needed to be done. But when their eyes met for the first time, he felt something stir inside him. It was as though the world around them faded, and there was only Maria. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady but softer than usual. Maria looked up, startled at first, but then she smiled politely. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice calm but warm. There was no rush in her words, no fakeness. Just a simple, honest answer. And for the first time that evening, the billionaire felt like he was talking to someone who didn't want anything from him. "I don't think we've met," he said, offering her a polite smile. "I'm Mr. Harris. I know who you are," she interrupted, her tone polite but distant. "Everyone knows who you are." Her words surprised him. He was used to people gushing over him, complimenting him, or flattering him in some way. But Maria didn't seem impressed by his title. She spoke to him like he was just another person, not the billionaire everyone else saw. That simple honesty, that lack of pretension, struck him. He found it refreshing. "Why do you seem so calm?" he asked, almost to himself. He wasn't expecting an answer, but Maria gave him one anyway. "Because I've learned to not get caught up in the excitement," she said. "I'm just doing my job, like everyone else here." There was something about her, something different from the women he had met in the past. She didn't want his attention. She didn't care about his wealth or his power. She was just herself. And in that moment, the billionaire felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A connection, A spark. Something real. They talked for a few minutes, and the conversation was easy. Simple. She didn't try to impress him with her words, and he didn't feel the need to put on a show. For the first time, they were just two people talking. He found himself listening to her, really listening, as if her words had a meaning that no one else's did. As the evening went on, he couldn't stop thinking about her. She wasn't part of his world, yet she made it feel like there was something else, something more meaningful, that he had been missing all along. The night ended, and he left the party, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something that would change his life. Maria, the quiet maid, had made him realize that there was more to life than all the things he had. And in that moment, he knew that this was a night neither of them would ever forget. The billionaire couldn't stop thinking about Maria. The next day, as he sat in his office overlooking the city, he found his mind drifting back to her. He had been to countless events like the one the night before, surrounded by people who wanted something from him, but Maria was different. She wasn't trying to impress him, nor did she seem interested in his wealth. There was something genuine in her calmness, in the way she didn't seem to care about his title. His life had always been about acquiring things, cars, houses, businesses, but Maria's presence reminded him of something he hadn't thought about in years: real human connection. He'd spent so much of his life building an empire, but no one had ever looked at him the way Maria did. She had seen him as nothing more than a man, someone who could be talked to like anyone else. It felt strangely liberating. He tried to brush the thoughts aside. It was ridiculous, wasn't it? She was a maid, and he was the billionaire who could have anyone he wanted. But the more he tried to forget about her, the more she lingered in his mind. A week passed before the billionaire saw her again. He found himself at another one of his events, a gala at his mansion. As usual, he was surrounded by important people, having conversations that felt shallow and insincere. But as the night wore on, he found his eyes drifting to the staff. He wasn't sure why, but he kept looking for her, Maria. And there she was, moving quietly through the crowd, taking care of things without drawing attention to herself. His heart skipped a beat as their eyes met again. This time, she gave him a small, polite smile, just like she had before. But something was different. This time, there was a sense of recognition, a spark of understanding between them. The billionaire made his way toward her, feeling an odd mix of nervousness and excitement. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a strong urge to talk to her again, to learn more about the woman who had captured his attention without even trying. "Maria," he said as he approached her, his voice quiet but confident. She looked up from her work, her eyes meeting his. "Mr. Harris," she replied with a soft smile. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, everything's fine," he said, realizing how strange it was to hear her say his name so casually. "I just wanted to say, I've been thinking about our conversation from last time." Maria's eyes flickered with curiosity, but she remained calm, not showing any sign of surprise. "I see," she said simply. "I didn't expect to find someone like you at one of my events," he continued, trying to keep the conversation light. "Most people here are so caught up in the glamour, in the show. But you're different. You seem unaffected by all of it." Maria smiled, her gaze thoughtful. "I suppose I just don't see the point in pretending," she said. "I'm here to do my job, and that's what matters to me." Her words struck him deeply. Here was someone who didn't care about the image, about the wealth or the fame. She was here for a simple reason: to work, to do something meaningful with her time. It made him wonder why he had spent so much of his life chasing things that never seemed to matter in the end. "You have a rare way of seeing the world," he said quietly. "Most people are too busy trying to impress others." Maria shrugged, not fully understanding the weight of his words. "I just believe in being honest," she said. "People will see who you really are, whether you want them to or not." The billionaire was struck by how genuine she was. There was no artifice in her voice, no desire to please him or anyone else. She was just real. It made him feel like he had been living in a bubble, surrounded by people who wanted something from him, and yet never really cared about him. "I admire that," he said, his voice softer now. It's not something I see very often. Maria met his gaze, and for a brief moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. It was just the two of them, standing in the middle of a glamorous event. Yet their conversation felt more real than anything happening around them. The billionaire felt an urge to reach out, to tell her everything he had been thinking. He wasn't sure why, but he felt like he could be honest with her, in a way he couldn't be with anyone else. "Maybe we should grab a drink sometime," he said before he could stop himself. "I'd like to talk more." Maria raised an eyebrow, surprised by his invitation. She studied him for a moment, as if weighing the offer. "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Mr. Harris," she replied carefully. "I don't mix my work with personal life." He felt a pang of disappointment, but he understood. She was right, of course. They came from two different worlds. He was a billionaire with a life full of expectations and privileges, and she was just doing her job, keeping to herself. But despite her answer, he didn't let the conversation end there. "I understand," he said. "But if you ever change your mind, I'd like to get to know you better." Maria didn't say anything for a moment, but her eyes softened. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll keep that in mind." And with that, she returned to her duties, disappearing into the crowd. The billionaire stood there for a moment, watching her move gracefully through the room, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of anticipation. He wasn't sure what would come of it, but he knew one thing. Maria had somehow sparked something in him that he couldn't ignore. That night, as he lay in bed, the billionaire thought about her again. He had met so many people in his life, but none had made him feel this way. For the first time, he realized that there was something missing in his perfect world. A connection, something real. And Maria, the quiet maid, was the one who had reminded him of it days past. But the billionaire couldn't shake the image of Maria from his mind. Every time he tried to focus on the endless piles of paperwork or the meetings lined up for the day, his thoughts would wander back to her. He had always been a man of control, someone who could manage his empire with ease. But Maria's presence had sparked something in him that felt out of his control, something he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just her beauty or the quiet confidence she carried with her. It was the way she made him feel like a person again, not just a figure of wealth and power. Every conversation with her had felt so effortless, so real. He had never met anyone like her, someone who didn't want anything from him, who treated him as if he were just another man. Despite his desire to forget about her, he found himself returning to the events she was working at, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. But she always seemed to be busy, lost in her duties, never pausing long enough to have another conversation. He knew he couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep finding excuses to be near her, but something inside him was pushing him forward. Finally, after days of deliberation, he made up his mind. He would find her. He had to know more about her. It wasn't just curiosity, it was something deeper. He felt a connection, a pull toward her that he couldn't explain. One evening, he made his way to another gala, one that was being held in the grand ballroom of his mansion. The usual crowd of well-dressed guests filled the room, but this time, something was different. As he walked through the crowd, his eyes searched for Maria. The moment he spotted her, his heart skipped a beat. She was standing by the side of the room, adjusting the decorations on the table, quietly doing her job. Without thinking, he moved toward her. This time, there was no hesitation, no waiting for the right moment. He walked up to her with a determined look on his face. "Maria," he said softly, his voice carrying over the hum of conversation in the background. She turned, surprised to see him, but there was no hesitation in her expression this time. She met his eyes and offered a small, polite smile. "Mr. Harris," she said, acknowledging him with a nod. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," he replied, a little too quickly. "But I've been meaning to talk to you." Maria's brows furrowed slightly. "About what?" He paused, unsure of how to start. It felt odd, almost too personal, but he couldn't ignore the urgency inside him. "I don't know how to say this, but I can't stop thinking about you," he said, the words coming out more honestly than he had intended. Maria's eyes widened a bit, but she didn't pull away. Instead, She watched him carefully, as if trying to read him. "I don't think that's something we should talk about here, Mr. Harris," she said softly. "This is a workplace." "I know," he said, a touch of frustration creeping into his voice. "But I can't pretend that nothing's happening between us. Every time I see you, it feels like something more than just a chance encounter. I know we come from different worlds, but I need to understand why I can't stop thinking about you." For a long moment, there was silence between them, the noise of the party buzzing around them. Maria looked at him, and he saw the conflict in her eyes. She wasn't like the other women he had known, women who were eager to accept his attention, to bask in his wealth. No, Maria was different. She seemed to be weighing the situation carefully, thinking about the consequences of what he was saying. "I can't be part of your world," Maria said finally, her voice steady but filled with something he couldn't quite place. "Regret, maybe? I'm just doing my job. I don't belong in the circles you move in." The billionaire felt a pang of disappointment. "You think I don't know that?" he replied quietly. "But I'm not asking you to be part of my world. I'm asking you to be a part of my life." Maria stepped back slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the weight of his words. "You don't understand," she said, her voice lower now, almost vulnerable. "I don't belong there. People like me, we don't get to be part of that life. We don't get to walk into your world and expect to be anything more than a maid, someone people only notice when they need something done." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had never thought about it that way. To him, she wasn't just a maid. She was someone who had made him feel alive again. He had spent years building an empire of things, but in that moment, he realized it had been empty. Maria had filled the empty spaces he hadn't known existed. He stepped closer to her, closing the space between them. "I don't care about titles," he said, his voice gentle now. "I care about you. What happens between us doesn't depend on your job or your status. It's about who you are." Maria's eyes softened, but there was still a hesitation in her gaze. "You don't know me," she said quietly. "You don't know the things I've been through. The things that make me who I am." The billionaire smiled, not out of arrogance, but with a sense of understanding. "Maybe not," he said, "but I want to. I want to get to know the real you. Not just the maid. The woman who's been honest with me in a way no one else ever has. And I think you want that too." Maria looked at him for a long moment, as if searching his face for something. Truth, maybe. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer. "I don't know if this is a good idea, but maybe we could talk. Sometime. Not here." The billionaire's heart soared. It wasn't a yes, but it was something. It was a crack in the wall she had built around herself. And he would take it. For the first time, he felt like he was on the verge of something real. Something that could change everything. As the night wore on, the billionaire found himself more certain than ever that Maria wasn't just another part of his life. She was someone who could make it feel complete. The next few days felt like a blur for the billionaire. After his conversation with Maria, he couldn't focus on anything else. Her words echoed in his mind, and he realized that for the first time in years, he was truly interested in someone. Someone who didn't care about his wealth or his status. Someone who saw through the layers of his carefully constructed life. He had always known that money couldn't buy happiness, but it wasn't until Maria came into his life that he truly understood what was missing. He couldn't wait to see her again. He knew he needed to approach this carefully. She had already made it clear that she wasn't interested in becoming part of his world. He respected her wishes, but he also knew that what they shared was too important to let go of without trying. The billionaire wasn't used to feeling like this. Uncertain, vulnerable, but he couldn't deny it. He wanted to get to know Maria better. He wanted to know who she really was, beyond the maid, beyond the walls she had built around herself. He had decided to reach out to her, to set up a time when they could talk outside of the constraints of the gala or the mansion. But when he tried to contact her, it seemed like she had vanished. Every time he looked for her at the events or tried to find her through his staff, she was always busy or out of sight. It frustrated him. She was deliberately avoiding him, and he didn't know why. But he didn't give up. He couldn't. Finally, A few days later, he received a message from her, simple but to the point. "We can meet tomorrow at the park near the fountain. No one will bother us there." His heart raced as he read the message. This was it. He had no idea what she was going to say, but he felt a surge of hope. He knew he had to take the opportunity. The next day, he arrived at the park early, the morning air crisp and fresh. He walked over to the fountain, his footsteps slow, his mind racing with anticipation. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew this was important. Maria had agreed to meet him, and that meant something. When he finally saw her, he couldn't help but smile. She was sitting on a bench by the fountain, looking calm and composed, as always. But this time, there was something different in her eyes, something that made him feel both nervous and excited at the same time. Maria looked up as he approached, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her gaze. She stood up and greeted him with a small, tentative smile. "I wasn't sure if you'd actually show up," she said, her voice light but sincere. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied, sitting down beside her. "I've been wanting to talk to you, Maria. I've been trying to reach you, but it seems like you've been avoiding me." Maria looked away for a moment, her eyes focused on the water. She was silent for a long time, and the billionaire could see that she was trying to gather her thoughts. He didn't rush her, though. He was patient. He had learned that much from the few moments they had shared so far. "I've been avoiding you," Maria said finally, her voice soft but steady. "I don't want to get caught up in something I can't control. I don't want to let myself hope that something could happen between us." The billionaire felt a pang of disappointment, but he understood. She was afraid. Afraid of what this could mean. Afraid of what it would cost her. He had seen the walls she had built around herself, and he knew they weren't just there to keep him out. They were there to protect her from getting hurt. "You don't have to be afraid," he said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. "I'm not asking for anything from you, Maria. I'm not trying to force you into anything. I just want to get to know you. I've never met anyone like you before, and I can't pretend that I don't feel something for you. But I'm not going to rush you. I'll wait, whatever it takes." Maria looked at him then, her eyes searching his face. She seemed to be weighing his words, the uncertainty still clear in her gaze. For a long time, she said nothing, and the billionaire sat beside her, wondering if he had said the wrong thing, if he had pushed her too far. But then, she spoke again. "I don't know how this would work," she said slowly. "I don't know if I can let you in. My life isn't like yours. It's messy. It's complicated. And I've spent so long keeping it all to myself." "I don't care about your past," he replied gently. "I care about who you are now. I care about the person you are when we talk, when we're just ourselves. And I want to see where this could go. But I'm not asking you to change your life. I'm just asking for a chance to be part of it." Maria paused, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the bench. She was still unsure, but the billionaire could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the way she was starting to lower her guard. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to get hurt." "I understand," he said, his voice warm. "But you don't have to do this alone. And I'm not going anywhere. I promise." For the first time, Maria allowed herself to smile, a small but genuine smile. It wasn't a promise, not yet, but it was something more than he had hoped for. It was a step in the right direction. As they sat together in the park, the world around them seemed to disappear. It was just the two of them, sharing a moment that felt like the beginning of something new. The billionaire didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Maria slip away. This was the beginning of something real, and he was willing to fight for it. The days that followed were filled with both hope and uncertainty. After their conversation in the park, the billionaire couldn't help but feel a sense of optimism. Maria had let her guard down, even if only slightly. There was a small but significant change in her, something that suggested she was beginning to trust him. It wasn't much, but for him, it was enough. Maria didn't seem to avoid him anymore. When they saw each other at the events, There was no longer that uncomfortable distance between them. Instead, there was a quiet understanding in the way they looked at each other, a silent connection that spoke louder than words. He saw her more often now, as she worked in the background, serving drinks, helping with the guests, but this time, it felt different. Every glance shared between them, every brief conversation, made him feel like they were starting something real, even if it was still fragile. But despite the progress, there was still hesitation. Maria wasn't ready to fully let go of the walls she had built over the years, and the billionaire understood that. Her past, the life she had been forced to live, had made her cautious. It was clear she didn't want to get hurt again, and the billionaire had no intention of rushing her into anything she wasn't ready for. One evening, after a particularly grand gala at the mansion, the billionaire couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts of Maria. He had been thinking about how to approach her next. How could he make her understand that he wasn't just looking for a fling or a momentary distraction? No, he wanted something deeper with her. He wanted to be part of her life, but he didn't want to push her into something she wasn't ready for. He decided to speak to her again. He had to know if she was feeling the same way he was. So, he arranged for a quiet meeting, away from the crowds and the noise of the mansion. This time, he wouldn't take no for an answer. He needed to know where they stood. He found her in the quiet hallway outside the ballroom, just as she was finishing up her tasks for the night. She looked tired, but there was a calmness about her, a grace that made him admire her even more. She didn't see him at first, so he stood there for a moment, watching her. For a second, he just wanted to freeze the moment in time, to savor it. He had never felt this way before, so vulnerable, so open to someone else. "Maria," he said softly, and she turned, surprised to see him standing there. "Mr. Harris," she said, offering him a polite smile. But there was something in her eyes now, something that had changed. "Please, call me John," he said, stepping closer. He was tired of the formality, tired of the distance that still remained between them. She hesitated for a moment, and then nodded. "All right, John." There was a silence between them for a moment, and then he spoke again, his voice low but sincere. "Maria, I need to be honest with you. I can't stop thinking about you. And I don't want this to be something casual. I don't want you to think that I'm just looking for a fling. What I feel for you is real, and I want to be part of your life. But I don't want to rush you into anything. I just want you to know that I'm here for you, whatever you decide." Maria's eyes softened, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. She stood still, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It wasn't fear, exactly, but there was hesitation there, and he could see it. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can let someone into my life like that. I've built so many walls to keep myself safe." John nodded, understanding. "I get it. I'm not asking you to let your walls down right now. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to make any decisions tonight or tomorrow. Take your time. But I'm not going to walk away. I want to be someone you can rely on." There was a long pause, and Maria seemed to be weighing his words. The silence stretched out, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. It was as though she was letting the words settle, thinking about what he had said. Finally, she spoke again. "I don't know what the future holds," she said softly, her gaze steady. "But I don't want to push you away either. I'm just scared." He smiled gently, his heart swelling at her honesty. "I understand. And I'm not going anywhere. Take your time. I'll be here, whenever you're ready." Maria nodded, and for the first time, she seemed to relax. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, and there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, a glimmer of hope, maybe. She didn't say anything more, but he saw it. It was enough. As the night ended, they shared a quiet moment, standing in the hallway, looking at each other without words. There was still uncertainty, still fear, but there was also something new. Something that had begun to bloom between them. A quiet connection that neither of them could ignore. For John, It was the beginning of something more than he had ever hoped for. He didn't know what would come next, but he was ready for whatever it was. He wasn't going to give up on Maria. And, for the first time in a long time, he felt that this was where he was meant to be. As they parted ways that night, there was an unspoken promise between them. It wasn't a promise of certainty, but it was a promise that they would take this journey together, whatever it looked like. And that was enough for now. The following weeks passed in a quiet, almost surreal way. The billionaire, John, found himself falling into a routine that, for the first time, didn't revolve around his business, his wealth, or the endless meetings that had once consumed his life. Instead, he began to focus on the one thing that mattered more to him than anything else: Maria. Though their interactions were still brief, they were meaningful. Every time their eyes met, every word they exchanged, John felt the connection between them grow stronger. Maria hadn't fully let her guard down, but she was no longer pushing him away either. They were building something, slowly, carefully, but something real, something that felt like it had the potential to change both of their lives. John had decided that he was going to be patient. He wasn't going to rush her. He had spent his life chasing after success, accumulating wealth, and trying to control everything around him. But with Maria, it was different. She wasn't something to be controlled. She was a person, with her own dreams, fears, and past. And he had learned that he couldn't just walk into her life and expect her to be ready for him. He had to be there for her, no matter how long it took. One evening, after another long day of events, John found himself in the same spot he had been in so many times before, sitting in his study, looking out over the city. But tonight, something felt different. He wasn't thinking about deals or money. He was thinking about Maria, and the possibility of a life with her. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. He looked up and saw Maria standing in the doorway. She was wearing a simple dress, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked a little nervous, but there was something else in her eyes too, something that made John's heart skip a beat. "Maria," he said, standing up quickly. "What's wrong?" She shook her head, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Nothing's wrong," she said, her voice soft. "I just wanted to talk." John's heart raced as he walked over to her. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He knew this was a big step for her. She had come to him, on her own, without hesitation. It wasn't something she had done before, and it meant more to him than she could possibly know. "Of course," he said, his voice steady. "I'm glad you came." They both sat down on the couch, and for a moment, there was silence between them. John could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air, but he didn't want to rush her. He knew she needed to speak when she was ready. "I've been thinking a lot," Maria said quietly, her eyes not meeting his. "About us. About everything." John waited, his heart pounding in his chest. "What have you been thinking?" Maria finally looked up at him, and her eyes were filled with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. "I'm scared, John. I've been through a lot, and I've always kept myself guarded. I've spent my life protecting myself from getting hurt, and I don't know how to let go of that." John reached over and gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You don't have to let go of everything. I'm not asking for that. I just want you to know that I'm here, Maria. You don't have to be afraid of what's coming next. We can take it slow. We can go at your pace." She took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I've never let anyone in like this before. I've always kept everything to myself. But, I don't know. I feel something with you. I feel like I can trust you. And that's scary." John smiled softly, his thumb brushing over her hand. "It's okay to be scared. I'm scared too. But we don't have to have all the answers right now. All I know is that I want to be with you. I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me." Maria looked at him, her eyes searching his face. For a long moment, there was silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if they were both taking this moment to truly understand each other. Finally, Maria spoke again, her voice quieter than before. "I don't know what this means for me, for us. But I'm willing to try. I want to see where this goes. John's heart swelled with a mix of relief and joy. He had waited for this moment. He had been patient, understanding, and now it was finally happening. Maria wasn't ready to fully let go of her fears, but she was willing to try. And that was all he needed. He leaned in slightly, his voice soft. We'll take it one step at a time. And whatever happens, we'll face it together. Maria smiled, a small but genuine smile. Together, she repeated. In that moment, John knew that this was the beginning of something truly special. It wasn't going to be easy, he knew that. But he was ready. He was ready to face whatever came their way, as long as they were together. The journey ahead wasn't going to be simple, but he had never been more certain of anything in his life. He wasn't just building an empire anymore. He was building a life with someone who had the potential to change everything. And he would do whatever it took to make sure they both had the chance to find happiness together. As the night went on, they talked more, shared more, and the connection between them grew even deeper. Maria was still uncertain, still guarded, but now, there was hope, a small, but powerful hope, that they could navigate the future together. Weeks passed, and with each passing day, the bond between Maria and John continued to grow stronger. It wasn't an easy path. There were moments of uncertainty, moments when Maria would pull away, as if the walls she had built for years would rise again. But John was patient. He had spent so much of his life chasing after success, money, and power, but now, with Maria, he realized that real success came from the relationships you built, the people you cared for. And he cared for her. Deeply. Maria, too, was beginning to let go of some of the fears that had held her back for so long. She still kept parts of herself hidden, but little by little, she allowed herself to trust John. He wasn't like the others she had known. He wasn't asking for anything from her, and that realization made her heart soften toward him more than she had ever expected. She found herself thinking about him when she wasn't around him, longing for the moments when they could just be together. No titles, no expectations, just two people getting to know each other. One evening, as they sat together in John's grand living room, a moment of quiet companionship settled between them. The mansion was empty, as usual, except for the two of them. The staff had gone home, and the world outside was slowly falling asleep. John had always felt lonely in this house, but now, sitting on the couch with Maria, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. You know, I never thought I'd be here, Maria said, breaking the silence. She wasn't looking at him but staring out the large windows that overlooked the city. I didn't think I'd ever let myself be a part of a life like this. John smiled softly, his heart swelling with tenderness. I didn't think I'd be here either. Not like this. But somehow, it feels right. Being with you. I don't want to be anywhere else. Maria turned to look at him, her eyes softening. I never let myself dream about a life like this, she admitted. I was always too afraid. Afraid of being disappointed. Afraid of getting hurt. I get that, John said, his voice gentle. I understand. I used to be the same way. I thought that if I just kept working, kept achieving, I could avoid feeling anything real. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. Maria's gaze held his, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly see him. Not the billionaire, not the powerful man, but just the man who was sitting beside her, trying to understand her world. Trying to be with her, not for what she could give him, but for who she was. And in that moment, she realized how much he had changed. She had seen the lonely man behind the facade, just as she had seen the woman behind her own walls. And together, they were beginning to heal, beginning to build something that was stronger than either of them had anticipated. She took a deep breath and smiled, her eyes bright. I'm glad I gave us a chance, she said, her voice filled with warmth. I'm glad I didn't run away. John reached for her hand, his touch gentle. I'm glad you didn't, too. The air between them shifted, and in that simple exchange, they both knew they had come a long way. Maria wasn't completely free from her past fears, but she was allowing herself to trust again. And John had learned, through his time with her, that there was more to life than wealth and power. It was about the connections you made, the people you loved, and the moments you shared. The future still felt uncertain, and there were challenges ahead. But for the first time, both of them felt like they could face whatever came their way. Together. As the weeks turned into months, their relationship blossomed. They spent time with the twins, bonding with them, and slowly, the billionaire began to see what it meant to be a father. The twins had their own struggles, growing accustomed to a new life, to a father who had only recently come into their world. But they were learning to trust him, just as Maria was. It wasn't easy, but they were making progress. John had never imagined that his life would be like this. He had always believed that wealth could fix everything, but now, he understood that real wealth came from love, from understanding, from the people you chose to share your life with. Maria and the twins had brought a kind of richness into his world that no amount of money could ever provide. One afternoon, as the sun began to set over the city, John and Maria stood on the balcony of his mansion, watching the sky change colors. The twins were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing in the background. "We've come a long way," Maria said, leaning into him, her head resting on his shoulder. John wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "We have. And it's just the beginning." In that moment, he knew that no matter what challenges they faced in the future, they would face them together. It wasn't just about what they had, but about what they were building, something real, something meaningful. And that was more than he had ever hoped for. The future was still unknown, but with Maria by his side, he felt ready for anything. Together, they would write the next chapter of their lives.